I welcome you each and all to this Your Women's Fund and Your Impact Collaborative. It's a very interesting group of RSVPs that we've had today. We've got a strong local showing, but we also have people from around the state and quite a few international folks, or national folks as well. So this is a topic that resonates with everyone, and we are here to help you focus. We focus at our each and every Impact Collaborative, and we know that focus is powerful. We focus with a gender lens. And as our research shows, that is still incredibly necessary. So the work that you are supporting by your presence today and fueling our mission in every single way that you can is vital. And we're going to keep you focused on why that is. Oh my goodness, this chat. Look at all you here. Thank you so much for being here. Let's go ahead and thank some of you are here in the audience. This board is amazing. Thank you each and all. Look at those faces. There is work and there is genius behind each of those thumbnails. So thank you, Amazing Women's Fund Board, for your service and your leadership. We also thank our elected officials. There is a huge RSVP list representing a lot of our elected officials today. So welcome to those of you who've already made it, and a permanent welcome to all of our policymakers who are influenced by the information that we're able to share with you, because it's shared with us through our community partners and the genius of the people who are doing the real work in this town. So we thank our community partners as well, the amazing direct service providers, our founder, and all of these serious people doing serious work often gather with us for fun things as well. So we have a serious networker for a serious cause. It's called Raise the Bar. It's 2 weeks from today. The countdown is now. You know, it's not a big program. What it is a big party and an opportunity for us to meet with many of our judiciary representatives. We have over 25 judges who've RSVP'd. This is based mostly on the legal community and surrounding businesses, but everyone is welcome. There are lots of banks and all kinds of other folks who are giving us corporate sponsorships and individual tickets. You're all welcome. We happen to have a great bar provided by Bacardi, a fun pop-up from Vesa Sur, who've been an incredible partner, a great wine donation from Sushi Sake in South Miami. So we thank you very much. South Miami is definitely supporting, and it's at the beautiful History Miami. So it behooves you to get your tickets if it's an individual ticket now, because the prices will go up. We've got early bird right now, and we really do need big sponsorship, because to be able to do the work that we do and to be able to come together, we do need fuel. And so thank you each and all. I see Janet Altman's in the house, Kaufman Rawson coming in yet again as a strong corporate sponsor. We thank you each and all. So on we go. One of the programs that you fuel, not just the Impact Collaborative convenings, not just the public awareness campaigns, but we have pillars that are represented today in Freedom from Violence. And we thank the Carrie Meek Foundation for all they're doing in the community, including their support of us and our Freedom from Violence pillar. We also have leadership, economic mobility, and health and well-being. These 4 pillars are critical to creating a Miami-Dade where women and girls can truly thrive. So we thank you at the Carrie Meek Foundation. And that supports one of our important programs. So we have these convenings, we have our public awareness campaigns, we have an amazing grant-making program that's looking at systems change, and we have research and we have data, our newest program. And I'm going to ask our leader, our team leader, Viviana Alvaro Pacheco, to tell you a little bit about the Gender Equity Index and Freedom from Violence. Viv, take it away.
Thank you, Maria. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. I'm just giving you a really quick glimpse at our Freedom from Violence pillar from our Gender Equity Index. So based on our recent research and data collection, our Freedom from Violence pillar shows that we are 44 points away from reaching gender equity in freedom from violence, freeing everybody, women and girls especially, from all types of violence. What you see here is our collection of data from 3 police departments in Miami-Dade County: the Miami-Dade Police Department, the City of Miami Police Department, and the Miami Beach Police Department. Due to a lack of data, these were the only police departments that we were able to gather information from, but we got some really great stuff from there. So as you can see here, for sexual violence, women accounted for 88% of sexual violence victims in 2021. And for domestic violence, women accounted for 71% of victims in Miami-Dade County in 2021. Our Freedom from Violence policy paper is coming out this Monday, so please don't miss it. You can scan the QR code on the next slide to access our Gender Equity Index page and make sure that you subscribe for any updates, and so that you get this Freedom from Violence policy paper on Monday. Thank you.
Thank you, Viviana, and great work. Thanks to all of you who came out for the launch last week. Very impressive, very impressive. Speaking of impressive, I'm impressed that there's a bipartisan national plan to end gender-based violence. Big work. And we have a brilliant leader who's currently working in the U.S. Department of Justice, who's going to bring a very condensed version of all of this powerful plan sketches out for us. We welcome the fabulous Carrie Bettinger-Lopez. Carrie, take it away.
Thank you so much, Maria, and Viviana and Camila and the entire Miami-Dade Women's Fund team. You guys are incredible. I have, the great fortune of being a Miamian myself, and having worked with you and known you for many years in my capacity, in my normal work as the director of the Human Rights Clinic at University of Miami School of Law, and doing a lot of work on women's human rights in our community with all of you. I'm taking a 2-year leave of absence from my work at DOJ from my work at UM to work with the Department of Justice, as Maria said. And it's long been my personal dream for the United States to kind of join the rest of the world in developing our own national action plan to end gender-based violence. And it's something that I thought a lot about when I served as White House advisor on violence against women in the Obama-Biden administration. And I'm so thrilled that as one of the first executive orders of this administration, of the Biden-Harris administration, the president called for the development of a national plan to end gender-based violence in our country that really coupled and mirrors work that and policies that we have that are global facing. And so this is really an amazing time when we are bringing human rights home to our country. And as Maria said, I'm really excited about the opportunity to have this conversation today to think about what that means at the local level. And Miami-Dade County has long been a forerunner in thinking about women's human rights and freedom from violence, and ways of bringing international human rights kind of norms and approaches, home to Miami-Dade, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But I'm going to quickly go through a slideshow with you guys, and then really excited for the conversation that we'll have afterwards about ways to localize this, as Maria said, ways to take some of these big ideas and kind of warning that some of the language I'll be talking will sound very wonky and policy talk. I'm going to try to kind of ground it as much as possible, but what I'm really looking forward to is the conversation afterwards about how we really synthesize and root some of these bigger ideas that kind of filter from both the global and national levels, and then localize them. So quickly here, and you can receive, we can put these in the chat, these links. These are some links to the new White House National Plan to End Gender-Based Violence, Strategies for Action. This was released in May of 2023. There's also a second link in here to a fact sheet that the White House put out when they released this plan. And then a third link to the Department of Justice, which released a press release, and several other agencies released press releases in kind of conjunction with the release of this big national plan in May, talking and lifting up the great work that's being done at various federal agency levels. And as I'll talk about, one of our big goals and visions for this plan, which is already underway, is serving as a kind of a bridge, finding a way to bridge our silos, which we know happen all too often in advocacy and policymaking spaces. Next slide, please. So as I was mentioning, this is just a screenshot of the executive order, which called for the development of a national gender strategy. I want to call your attention to that as well. That was released in October of 2021 by the White House Gender Policy Council. It's a broader gender strategy that really picks up on your 4 pillars from the Women's Fund of leadership, economic mobility, health and well-being, and freedom from violence. It has about 10 different priorities and for action, and one of them is freedom from gender-based violence. And it calls, as part of the implementation of that national gender strategy, for the development of this national action plan to end gender-based violence, which is the subject of what I'll be talking about today. So next slide. Oh, and actually, sorry, before the next slide, just to call your attention, as I mentioned at the bottom of this text, to call your attention to the update to the global gender-based violence strategy, which the State Department and USAID issued, which again is the kind of the embodiment of our country's foreign policy goals and priorities on gender-based violence. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, this U.S. National Action Plan really fits nicely within a larger global movement towards developing these action plans. UN Women has encouraged this. They have a handbook that I want to recommend to you. And the 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence campaign, which UN Women helps to organize, is coming up next month. And this ties in nicely to that campaign. Next slide. These are just some screenshots of some other countries' national plans. Australia was a real forerunner here. They came up with their first national action plan on violence against women and children in 2010. Then they've since developed several action plans, including a new 10-year action plan, which they released late last year. Canada recently released one. South Africa has a very broad-based, far-reaching one. Finland, Uruguay, again, around 80 countries around the world have some version of an action plan on gender-based violence, violence against women, women and children. And so very, very interesting stuff. Okay. And here in a municipal context, Miami-Dade County, of course, we have our CEDAW ordinance, which gives rise to the publication of the gender equity data you just heard about, and formulating recommendations for local action. We also have a resolution, a county resolution, that states that freedom from domestic violence is a fundamental human right. And so we have a local context for really grounding a lot of this work. Next slide, please. And other cities, Chicago, first and foremost, have developed their own municipal action plans on gender-based violence. So this is a trend that can be localized. Chicago is an example of that. Next slide, please. So going into the development of our plan, just to give you a little bit of a sense of the process, we had listening sessions with and I was at the White House at this time about kind of a year and a half ago, and we hosted a series of listening sessions, or rather attended a series of listening sessions that civil society hosted, and about 25 different organized listening sessions with over 2,000 individuals. And we also developed interagency working groups across the federal government that really dealt with some of the main focus areas that we were hearing from civil society. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's just, in my short time remaining, I want to just give you a little bit of an outline of the plan itself. There is a vision statement. Some of the beauty of these action plans, people ask, what's the value added of an action plan? One of the value adds is that there is a vision. It is goal-oriented. It it has a blueprint for action. So it is not merely responsive, but rather it captures kind of both the responsive aspects that much legislation, for example, captures, along with a vision and a larger approach. And so the vision is that the United States will be a place where all people live free from gender-based violence in all aspects of their lives. And this vision applies to all people in a very intersectional way, regardless of gender, sex, gender identity, sex characteristics, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, and many other factors. Next slide, please. There's a definition of gender-based violence. We worked very hard to try to figure out a good, solid definition that was broad enough in scope that we could understand the various ways in which violence against an individual or group that is based on actual or perceived sex, gender, gender identity, sex characteristics, or sexual orientation, how those harmful threats or actions get manifested. But we also really wanted to hone in on the forms of gender-based violence that are most prevalent and problematic in our country, and that our federal response has done and we believe can do the most to address. Sexual violence, intimate partner violence, stalking, and other interconnected forms of violence and coercive control, of which we name several. I'll move on for the sake of time. This is just a slide that really kind of talks about the added value and priorities. I just want to highlight this whole of government, bridging silos approach I mentioned, the intersectional lens, really highlighting principles of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, and the connectedness of people of intersectional identities. And the importance of honing in on historically marginalized and vulnerable populations and the ways in which they experience gender-based violence and are at risk, as well as prevention strategies. As I said, this is a long-term blueprint. It identifies targeted actions, policies, programs, and research that the federal government can do. It calls for deep collaboration and really places survivors' experiences and needs and knowledge at the center of solutions and services, and has monitoring, evaluation, and accountability measures. That's another real hallmark of these national plans. Next slide, please. Okay, this is just kind of a screenshot showing a lot of the interconnectedness that we try to capture in the plan, showing the various ways that gender-based violence has impacts on health, opportunity, and well-being in all aspects of our lives. Next slide, please. This whole of government approach I mentioned, I just want to highlight some key pieces of legislation that probably many of you are quite familiar with, perhaps are funded by the Violence Against Women Act, the Family Violence Prevention and Services Act, the Victims of Crime Act. There's many key pieces of legislation that do a lot of work to help address the problem of violence against women, gender-based violence. And this idea of a coordinated community response that's actually captured as a best practice in VAWA, we see this as our coordinated community response at the federal level. We're trying to coordinate ourselves. And a few highlights of things that I just want to note. We're trying to really lift up in the plan areas that are not traditionally associated with gender-based violence, and that aren't "quote unquote" coded as areas where violence against women takes place. But we know that if we uncover kind of any aspect of our society, any area in our society, there are critical linkages with violence against women and gender-based violence. We really want to focus on our own workforce, our federal workforce, supporting employees who are impacted by GBV. We want to prioritize areas, as I said, that have been underemphasized, such as including prevention, racial justice, LGBTQI+ equality, intergenerational healing, community wellness, and social norms change. And yeah, we'll go to the next slide. I know I need to end. There is, for those of you, who have limited time, which I know is everybody on this call, there is kind of a Cliff Notes version, a snapshot, an at-a-glance, as we call it, which kind of gives a snapshot of the pillars, the goals, and the objectives of the plan. Under each of the objectives in each section of the plan are more concrete strategies for action. But if you're looking for an overview, this at-a-glance, which I think starts on page 7 of the plan, is the place for you to go to just get a quick snapshot. And this is an example. There are a set of guiding principles, some of which I've already mentioned. These are the principles that guided us in developing this plan, and that we think are important to continue to be a reference point for us as we think about our work. And finally, these are the 7 strategic pillars. And I'm happy to, as when we talk about, get into the Q&A and the conversation, I'm happy to go into any of these in greater detail. But I want to just kind of name these because these, as I said, emerged from the listening sessions. This is what we heard from survivors, from advocates, from academics, from people in various systems who said, these are the areas that we think we need the most help on from the federal government, that we'd like to see the federal government work on, support, whether it's financially, programmatically, through various initiatives, legislation, research, data collection, and other areas. So the first was prevention. The second, support, healing, safety, and well-being. The third, economic security and housing stability. Fourth, online safety. Fifth, legal and justice systems. Sixth, emergency preparedness and crisis response. And seventh, research and data, which is a cross-cutting theme I know we'll be getting into in greater detail, a real priority for this administration to lift up research and data in each of the preceding 6 pillars, as well as think about methodologies and approaches that can give us broader data sets and more inclusive data sets that are also always grounded in, as I said, the experiences, knowledge, and needs of survivors and communities that have experienced the most vulnerability and marginalization. I think that's all I've got. Can you go to the next slide, please? Finally, very final slide is implementation. No plan and no approach is complete without an implementation segments of it. So we do have this section of the plan that focuses on implementation, integrating this approach between our global work and our work at home, a whole of government coordination approach, this monitoring and accountability that I referred to, and we have 4 different methods through which we are holding ourselves accountable, and ongoing consultation and engagement, which is part of our conversation today. And then I think I do have one last slide, which is just to point to you, if any of you are looking and wondering kind of what is the federal government doing, we actually had never put together kind of across the agencies an annex or a catalog of the various work that's being done, examples, though non-exhaustive list of specific initiatives that are already underway. And so if you're looking to see, you can go to Annex 1, and there's hyperlinks to lots of legislation and initiatives and programs and research that's been done that can hopefully serve as like a catalog, as I said, of sorts. So with that, I will stop, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Carrie, everything you've said translates so beautifully locally. Your Women's Fund is dedicated here to creating a post-silo Miami for women and girls. So whether it's the data, the directories, the knowing where to send people, you have a lot of people who are in this audience with us today, in addition to our brilliant panelists who can do a lot about this. So it's really exciting. So welcome to those of you who are first timers. May it not be your last time to participate in an impact collaborative. We take our polls pretty seriously, and we take the exit survey pretty seriously. We also take the chat very seriously because we want you to connect. We are weaving a stronger community fabric via the Women's Fund, but you don't have to do it via us. Please connect together. All of these ways help. So please participate in the polls, do the exit survey, do talk in the chat, do put your Q&A questions in there, because we're hopefully going to have a little bit of time at the end And we also are going to connect you, if you'd like, to our brilliant panelists today. So as we go on, I want to explain that we could have had more than these three experts with us today. Our criteria for choosing was criteria for places that we really feel like we have traction, where the Women's Fund is working very closely on issues that fit into this national plan, which is tremendous and large. We want to focus locally on places we have traction. And we could have added a few more. I know Lotus House is here in the audience with us today. For example, they are leading with the National Women's Shelter Network, right? Lotus House is a beacon, a national beacon, and that is a strong part of what this national plan is. We have a lot of you here, Christy House and others who are with us today, who are doing amazing work. But we're taking three focus places where we have great traction. And we're going to ask our three panelists to do the impossible, introduce themselves in 2 minutes or less in context of today's webinar. We are focusing locally on the gender lens on gun violence because we've got huge traction here. We'll be talking about a lot of traction that we've got on data with our second panelist, and then with amazing leadership, we're going to focus on traction on labor trafficking. So we're going to welcome the wonderful, powerful Lucia Davis Rayford to, is it possible to talk about yourself in 2 minutes or less in context of this webinar? Just go ahead and try, Lucia. Take it away.
It is very, very possible. As a matter of fact, good morning, everyone. I'm Lucia Rayford, and I am now president and CEO of the Carrie Meek Foundation. Prior to that, I was with Miami-Dade County for a number of years over its social services arm. And prior to that, I was very happily engaged with gender-based violence prevention and systems developments for prevention in New York City. Our work here now centers on local efforts to respond to and hopefully develop preventative measures for the elimination of gun violence and improving our response to its impact. We have a very well integrated community-wide collaborative that we've developed with a grant activity between 80 and 84 or so organizations that'll be working across the spectrum on this issue. Quite a number of them have a gender lens on this issue, research issues focused on, as well as up from the ground, grassroots from the bottom of our tiny little communities to the very top of it, everybody collaborating, and we look forward to a great community engagement response to this. I hope that was less than 2 minutes, Mario.
That's perfection. Perfection. Thank you so much, Lucia. And Alexis, I think our team needs to post a link to the op-ed that you collaborated with us on. Thank you for that. And thank you for being with us today and introducing yourself. Take it away, sir.
Hi, good morning, everybody. First of all, big kudos to the Women's Fund and as well to my friend and colleague, Carrie Bettinger-Lopez, for the incredible amount of work that she put together with her team to put this national action plan together. I was watching it be birthed, so it's incredible to see it to fruition. My name is Alex Picaro. I'm a professor of criminology at the University of Miami. I came here about 4 years ago. A little over a year and a half ago, I was tapped by President Biden to serve as the director of the Bureau of Justice Statistics, which is one of 13 federal statistical agencies in charge of crime and justice data. I miss my teaching and research and working with all the great people in Miami, and so I wanted to come back. So I'm very glad to be home here back in Miami. My work in this space has been focused primarily on research and data. I was one of the first set of researchers to actually document empirically in several cities in the US and around the world that domestic violence increased during the early stages of lockdowns in various locations using a variety of different kinds of data, not just police data, but also hotline data and hospital admission data. That information was critically important because it drew attention to what was going on, the pandemic within the pandemic that a lot of not just women, but children were experiencing throughout the world. It made the New York Times, and of course, when something makes the New York Times, it gets national attention. So it was really great to see that work actually be used and spotlighted. At the Bureau of Justice Statistics, I oversaw several important data collections, but two I want to highlight here that are relevant for people. The first one was that we notice in our victimization surveys that about 40% of victims and survivors never report to law enforcement. The second thing we found is that a lot of victims and survivors don't go seek services. We actually developed maps that you can drill down at the county level using data from several years ago, where we were starting the recollection of those data again. That there are a lot of counties and cities in the US that don't have a lot of victim services. Fortunately, we live in an incredible community of people who are so committed to moving the needle in this regard, but we have to do better. We have to get people to report to law enforcement, as well as getting the social services and help that they need, but also to encourage our leaders to support those efforts. We have an incredible mayor in this county. As you all know, I helped her with her peace and prosperity plan. She grew up in this space, and we're so fortunate to have someone like that and the people in this room. So I'm very fortunate to be part of this small conversation. And as a good academic, hopefully I didn't go over 2 minutes.
Perfection, Alexis, all perfection. And Santra, you've got so much to say, but I'm going to let you try and say it in 2 minutes or less. Welcome.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. So always impressed by the work that you all do. My name is Santra Dennis. I am the executive director of the Miami Worker Center. We organize tenants, but also care workers, domestic workers, house workers, your home health aides, nannies, and house cleaners for the rights, respect, and resources that they deserve. And this work happens in Miami-Dade County. South Florida has the largest population of domestic workers in the state. And what we know is that work that is isolated, work that is has been left out of many of the federal benefits like OSHA, like overtime benefits, et cetera. They also experience a lot of exploitation. And so we do the work to ensure that they know their rights, that they not only know their rights, but stand up against wage theft and labor trafficking and sexual harassment on the jobs.
You're less than 2 minutes. You're good. You're very good. We're going to ask you each panelists to focus us for 3 minutes or less on what you are seeing and what we should know. And we're going to start with the gun violence. Lucia.
I'm sorry. What we are seeing is what we all know. And that's why it's so important that its occurrence be documented through research and data collection. But certainly we know, in terms of the way we live our lives, the impact of violence, and particularly gun violence, on the safety of women and girls. Our work right now centers on putting a community-wide lens with some focus on how women and others experience gun violence, either as a perpetrator or a victim of it. We find most likely than not, women are more likely to be the victims of it. Our work, we hope, will ensure that we have the data that proves it. Again, very smartly, as Alex mentioned, not just relying on law enforcement data, which is so difficult to reach in our community that has 32 law enforcement agencies that are not necessarily coordinated in the way that they report, the frequency with which they report, and the way they dive deep into the data to determine who's doing what to whom, why, and on what basis. But health reports, we will go, hopefully, with some of the work that our grantees are doing, we're going to be doing surveys that really reaches out in churches and social circles as well, to make sure that we get information on how our community is impacted by gun violence. And we hope to get good data in that respect. And we're just pushing on. The thing is, though, we know, because we do know, as a survivor of domestic violence, I can assure you that my experience of it was not an isolated one, to the extent that there's so many commonalities of the victimization of women and girls. Surely what we know is the greatest likelihood of your being a victim of a crime is determined at birth if you're born with ovaries and, if you're a girl, if you're born a girl. But anyway, I don't want to dominate any more of that time. But the fact of the matter is, we hope to actually document the occurrences and the experiences, particularly of women of color and poor women, because we do know that that population of people is marginalized in every way, particularly this one.
I want to take a moment to thank you for that absolute empowering and focusing. If that doesn't get everybody focused on the work at hand, I don't know what will. Lucia, thank you very much. Alexis, we've got work to be done here and ways to do it right. Tell us what you're seeing.
Yeah, it's hard to improve upon that answer, but what I'm seeing is what we're not seeing. And I want to highlight that in two ways. What keeps me up at night is that we know that in immigrant communities, especially undocumented immigrants. I'm a son of two Cuban refugees who came to this country in the early 60s. I recognize that a lot of individuals don't want to have contact with any kind of service that may alert officials to their status one way or the other. We need to encourage those individuals and protect those individuals as much as we can. So that is one of those things that I'm seeing that I wish we saw more of. And the second one is, what are the long-term consequences of what this pandemic has done to families and especially children who actually witnessed violence, whether that was physical or perhaps even more so emotional and verbal violence. So what we're seeing is what I'm seeing, that we don't see all of those answers, those questions that we need answers to. And so I'm hopeful that we'll be able to move the needle in that regard and just stop getting kids from picking up guns and solving their conflicts with guns in their hands.
The combination of data and stories together can truly influence policy. So with all of our panelists here, I think we're on a good road to getting a lot of both. Sandra, you have stories. You are very entrenched in the community and give us a richness. Please give us your perspective.
Yeah, I think I will say that I'm really appreciative of this expanded definition of gender-based violence. I think that often people, and rightly so, think about gun violence. They think about different types of abuses, but not necessarily the gender-based violence that people are experiencing at the workplace. And so for us, we know that a majority of the workers who are domestic workers, who work as your home health aides, nannies, and house cleaners, are people of color. We also know that there's an immigration angle, and that so we see people who are labor trafficked, who are scared because their passports are being withheld from them, that they actually were promised terms under a contract that have been violated, and that when they speak up, they're threatened with ICE. And so we also know that we saw conditions where people are actually, they thought they were going to be a live-in domestic worker and they're sleeping in a laundry room with the pet. And so actually the conditions for workers, the workers that make all of our work possible, who take care of our loved ones, who take care of our children, our elderly, we know that there's lots of exploitation that seems invisible. We actually want to shine the light about what's happening in Miami-Dade County and all over this country with those workers, with our people, with our mothers, our sisters, our aunts, who do such valuable work, and bring it to the light and ask. I'll go into solutions after that, but I think that these are the stories that we want to bring to surface, we want to bring to light. And it's not because they are isolated that we get to ignore what their experiences are. It's actually our responsibility to bring it to the light. We actually say bring it out of the shadows, right? To ensure that we as a people, as a collective, as a community, can do something about this.
You're saying is so powerful, Sandra. It's hard to collect data on the powerful influence of the presence, for example, of a gun. How do you collect that data? We need the data so much, like we need the data from this poll, but that's going to be difficult data to collect. We need the stories of people who are experiencing all different sorts of violence, whether it's direct and physical or that's implied and coerced. There's a lot that's going on. This poll, please pay attention, folks. If you're eating your breakfast while you're listening to this webinar, you have the opportunity in this poll to be connected with any of these organizations of our speakers today. So please do. Our team is amazing, and they will connect you, because this can't live just here. You're all very powerful influencers, and you're all pebbles today, and there's a ripple effect of this impact collaborative. So please do fill in the poll. Lucia, there's a huge infusion of funds coming into the community through you and the Carrie Meek Foundation. Please tell us, what can we do? What can this community do?
Well, I actually wish it were huge, Maria. It is just a trickle of what is really, really, really needed. And I'm so concerned that we really don't have developed, as we will in the very near future, a plan with specific benchmarks that we want to achieve over a period of time. And I want to be very careful that the community invests in ensuring that the work that we're trying to do is not a one-off, but is a part of an overall plan for the development of the health and safety of our community. I am concerned that we are looking at this from a very narrow lens. I'm concerned that we are looking at violence from what I think judgmentally look at it from who's committing it, rather than all the systems, including the NRA and other organizations that create a scenario, collaborate, or just by happenstance, but it's not really. Create the opportunity and all of the weapons that it takes for all the things that we're taking into account. I don't think that we're going to be as impactful as we'd like to be until we pull this thread all the way backwards to the originators of capacity and the social structures that really support and almost encourage the commission of violence. So I'm concerned that we're doing kind of one-off efforts right now, but discussions such as these with the people around the table, the collective table such as these, hopefully we will join hand in making sure that this is a continued, sustained plan and movement that is not just going to be the flavor of the day. That really concerns me, because I mean, our kids are dying, our women are dying, our children are dying, our parents are dying, our seniors are dying. There's a high rate of violence in the senior community, in which I'm a proud member of that, by the way. And we've really, really, really got to take this seriously from a gender lens in particular, because we know who's more likely to be victimized by it. But let's just make sure we develop plans locally that are very, very specific, but broad enough to be inclusive and include most of the community.
Brilliant. You got a lot of hearts on that one from the audience here, Lucia. Thank you very much. Alexis, please tell us what can be done.
Well, I hate following her because I don't know how you follow those kinds of words, but you know, when I was a kid, we were not very well off, and I remember my dad would change oil in our car growing up in the DC area, and he used this motor oil called Quaker State. And Quaker State had this great adage: so you can pay me now, or you can pay me later. And so I would like to see a lot more attention being given to kids when they're growing up about how to treat people in relationships and how to deal with conflict. And I worry that people, especially over the last several years of higher levels of government prior to this one, that conflict is something that people relish. We saw this past weekend in DC. And I think we need to move away from not just conflict, but unhealthy conflict, and to try to get kids to learn how to talk about problems, and also sometimes how to walk away rather than escalating a situation. So that's what I would like to see done.
Brilliant. Alexis, can you address what you addressed a little bit in the op-ed about getting the gendered data? You and Viviana and Dr. Maria Ilcheva from our board did the op-ed. Can you tell people just quickly what Viviana is facing when she's trying to get our gender equity dashboard and our gender equity index?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've mentioned this before, that, nobody would fly an airplane built in 1940. I would hope. We want to fly airplanes built in 2023, but the problem is, historically, we've been collecting data the exact same way since the 1940s, and there's been movement to transition to a better data collection system, but it's not required in the United States. And so it's voluntary that the all the law enforcement agencies collect this data, but then you have 18,000 law enforcement agencies. They all collect data in a different way, and they all report it differently. So, and not all of them have it on like their public facing dashboard. And I think that, you know, what we saw with the tragic killing of George Floyd was that a movement towards not just transparency, but data transparency. And when we go to collect information on domestic violence or interpersonal violence from police departments, not just locally, but nationally, there's a not uniform data collection because the laws are differently across states. And sometimes they're still focused on a male offender and a female victim. And we know that domestic violence comes in all shapes or forms. So the more we can get law enforcement agencies to collect standardized information and then to report that information, bearing in mind, of course, that you have to have PII, which is confidential data. You don't want to put information out there about address, location, or obviously survivors' names, but just provide the raw information so we understand what the problem is, at least from the law enforcement arrest perspective. It's a big challenge, but I think what the Women's Impact Collaborative is doing and the Women's Fund is doing, what our op-ed hopefully called attention to, is that, hey, folks, this is low-hanging fruit should you want to commit the resources to do it. And by the way, there's every reason to do it and no reason at all not to do it. So hopefully we can move the needle a little in that regard and get a good handle or a better handle on the size and nature of the problem.
Thank you so much, Alexis. Sandra, what can we do?
Sure. And so lots of things that we can do. I like Pillar 5 that came from the Biden administration, where it talks about legal and justice systems. How do we expand pathways for survivors to seek justice? And so we know that all over this country, there's been domestic bills of rights that really increase the ability for domestic workers to have rights. And so this state can do something, but also Miami-Dade County can have a domestic worker bill of rights. Miami-Dade County could also have a registry where we know who are hiring these our domestic workers, where domestic workers who are coming from different countries who may not necessarily know labor rights in Florida, they can be trained, they can be introduced to organizations who will train them, who will help them understand their rights and what is right and what's wrong in terms of labor protections that they do have. These are things that we can do right now. And we hope that, you know, this entire community will stand up with domestic workers to ensure that they can continue to do the work that they love, but they also can have an access to bring their complaints forward. Last kind of solution I'll bring is right now, the Commission on Human Rights, domestic workers cannot bring their complaints forward because in order for a worker to bring their complaints forward, the employer has to have 5 or more employees. We think that if anyone has 1 employee, they should be able to bring their complaints on harassment forward, their complaints, any kind of complaints forward. And we know that's something that we can do also. There's something local that we can do to ensure that domestic workers who have employers who just employ them, that they can bring those complaints forward and be heard and something can be done about it.
Profoundly important information. Incredible point, Sandra. I'm going to listen to this replay more than once. Really powerful. Carrie, please join us for the Q&A. We've got all kinds of great questions coming in from different places. Let's see how many we can get in. The first one's going to be the one that I'm not certain if anybody here is able to take this one right away. Does Florida have red flag laws to prevent the death of intimate partner violence and domestic violence victims? Is anybody able to take that? Lucia, are you able to take that?
I don't know that there's any law that prevents anything at this point. Certainly, it's going to take something far more comprehensive than legislation to prevent homicide or prevent serious injury from violence. There are so many other avenues that we have to take into consideration. And in developing a plan, certainly, legislation is the kind of foundational stuff that you need. Attitudinal change, information and research and data and conversations and public awareness is absolutely predominant. We have had laws against homicide since there were humans, and it's not stopped people from killing other people, not the law itself, but all we do is increase penalties or something in that regard. But I think we need to think far more comprehensively than just legislation and laws. Certainly it's important, it's almost bedrock, but human behavior is far more complex than that.
If there's anybody in the audience who has specific, terminology on the red flag laws themselves, I invite you. I don't know if Amanda or Christy House or somebody has, really specific terminology on that. I invite you to please, post something in the chat, because I do know the term, but I can't answer that one very specifically either. Everything that Lucia said is absolutely the truth. I'm going to go on to Janet Altman is asking here, are we collecting data the right way here in Miami-Dade County? And we know that we're not yet, but we do know that the Women's Fund, with the fuel of many of you here today, are investing a lot of time and a lot of sweat equity and a lot of goodwill and earned trust in the community to try and accelerate the collection of that data to be better. People who are not giving it to us, it's not because they're not in the mood, right? We need resources and we need focus and decision makers to say, we do need that data. It needs to be making women and girls and all genders visible. Right. So Alexis, I'm going to let you go into a little bit more of the specifics. So you could take this one. What would have to happen and what are we asking the police departments to do?
Yeah. So what would have to happen is, we have to think about when an officer goes to the scene of a domestic violence incident or suspicion of a domestic violence incident, he or she has to write all of the information down. So who the suspect is or are, as well as the victims and survivors. And so code that information with what they see at the time. That not just includes not just the sex or gender of the individual, but also the race and ethnicity of the individual. That's just as important, as well as the immigrant status, documented or not documented. So we're talking about all of this information. A lot of that sometimes isn't known to the officer when he or she gets to the scene, and somebody may not want to have certain kinds of information reported. So we do have that kind of issue at that actual incident, but it still behooves the officer to get that information, even if it's subsequent to that event, then code that information and put that in a simple data set. It's very simple to put that in an outward facing profile or dashboard, presuming, of course, you have to be very mindful of how much detailed information you provide to the public. So for example, I'm a 53-year-old Cuban-American guy. 2 pieces of information can identify me in a data set very, very quickly. So we have to be mindful to protect individuals who've been victimized, while at the same time getting aggregate information into the community so we understand the nature of the victimization experiences. So it's more than doable, because several police departments around the country do this, and around the world. So it's not that it's not doable. It's just that you have to have political will and social capital. You need the people and the people power in those agencies to produce that data.
And Janet, we are going to the chiefs of police. We're looking for the goodwill of a lot of the brilliant civil servants that we have here, and asking for their goodwill in getting that data. And we're not going to stop until we get it. And they need help from their bosses as well. They need fuel, they need funds. So let's be collaborative and not just screaming, like, how do we get this done? And it's always collaborative, always a whole government approach.
Maria?
Yes, Carrie.
I just wanted to chime in back to the question of red flag laws also. I just want to point to some language from the national plan for folks who are interested in this question about kind of firearms that Lucia has so very eloquently and powerfully underscored. So I believe this is on page 58 of the national plan. It's in a blue box. We have kind of these pull-out boxes that highlight various areas. We call them a GBV lens on, and in this case, it's on reducing gun violence. Just want to read from this. We say the federal government can further the goal of reducing violence through enforcement of existing firearm laws that protect anyone convicted of a misdemeanor crime of domestic violence or subject to a domestic violence protection order, from possessing or purchasing a firearm. And I want to point to the recent bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the BSCA, which strengthened firearm prohibitors by partially closing the boyfriend loophole, the so-called boyfriend loophole. Many of you are probably familiar with that. That's for dating partners who are convicted of a domestic assault, by prohibiting them from purchasing or possessing a firearm for a period of at least 5 years. And then the Violence Against Women Act of 2022 also addresses firearm violence. So for anybody interested in this, there's the NICS, the NICS Denial Notification Act, which was part of VAWA 22, which requires federal officials to notify state and local law enforcement when individuals who are legally prohibited from purchasing firearms fail a background check through the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, the NICS system. And it clarifies that persons convicted of qualifying misdemeanor crimes of domestic violence who violate local laws are subject to federal firearms prohibitions. So I just want to point you to that language. We have lots of
crimes is critical,
Yeah.
right? It
Yeah.
makes all the difference. The data that you gave before, Alexis, that 40% of people never report DV or seek services. I had an incident late last night. Somebody was calling me looking for help. Somebody who's been abused is seeing a grandchild abused, and they're afraid of the abuser, and how do we go there? So, you know, we do big things like impact collaboratives and public awareness campaigns, but we also get calls. And the only way that we can do anything with those calls is because of a lot of you who are here in the audience. So thank you all. Carrie, I'm going to quickly answer a little bit, and just you can add to this. Cindy Lerner's asking, she'd like to see the plans created by other countries that have been created, like Australia and Canada. There is a plan, major urban cities and counties who are doing this. I think the lead on this, Cindy, is Chicago. They are the first one who are trying to take this national plan and do a comprehensive local plan. When I saw that, I told Carrie, too much for us to bite off of, but let's start with an impact collaborative. But this is great potential for the Women's Fund, or some of us collaboratively to look at in future years for Miami. I think Viviana Kami, I think you've got an email with a link to the Chicago plan. So if you can help find that and put that in the chat, that would be great. Anything you want to add to that, Carrie?
I think what you said is great. Yes, Chicago
Okay.
has a plan. I will say that several states and municipalities around the country are looking at this national plan and saying, how can we localize this? And of course, everybody has to adapt, the concept for their local circumstances. And that's why, this panel is so powerful. You all have pulled out like some things that are very unique to Miami-Dade, but also things that have resonance across the country. And I think we've done that well in Miami-Dade County. And so the fact that we have a CEDAW ordinance, incorporating the International Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women here at our municipal level, shows that we have a precedent for doing this, for taking a big idea that comes from the national or the local or the global space and bringing it home.
In the minute that we have left, quick for you, Sandra, Carrie Roach is asking, how will faith-based communities locally be approached to collect data about domestic?
Excellent.
I'm sure Lucia has thoughts too. I have very conflicting thoughts about faith-based. I think there's a lot of work to be done with faith-based, especially in our communities where leaving a spouse or partner can be so taboo. And so I think we actually need to pull in more faith-based into our work to ensure that they could be on the same page, same messaging with us as well. But I'll actually yield my time to Lucia, who might have some thoughts as well.
I do. My bit larger thought was, I'd like to have the people on this call and those who might be listening in the future put some thought into how we might expand our system of reporting. There's far too much reliance on law enforcement, which is not necessarily the best or most appropriate tool. And certainly victims have numbers of reasons why not to report to law enforcement, based on their own safety, based on their immigration status, based on how you're going to be treated as a victim, and all of those things. So that might be the dangerous thing. That brings to me the thought that we have to think about creating systems, other systems and processes by which this kind of pain and hurt can be reported. Certainly churches and religious institutions have to be considered. But we also have to consider a massive training and a massive information sharing with that particular community, which is typically keep you right where you are in a bad, safe relationship, an unsafe relationship because it's a sin or whatever it is to protect the family. So I want to make sure that we think more broadly about how reports should be made, to whom should they be made, and how we might train to create this collaborative kind of system across certainly our own neighborhoods, but just broadly. Law enforcement is not the key. It is a good first step, but we have to take into account the way people live, and that's not necessarily the best way.
We're going to keep everybody 1 extra minute. I'm going to ask the team to look up the answer to the question that Risa has about the provisions of VAWA, and try and circulate that when we reach out to you all after this. Please know that we come together to focus and see how much we see when we come together with these brilliant experts, and each and every one of you who participate here. You are the pebble that's going to take all this information out into our community and make it a stronger one. Thank you. You've got different ways to participate with us, not just here in the Impact Collaboratives. You can volunteer and be an impact agent. You can support our grand mission. We have amazing committees, right, Santra? You're part of one of our greatest committees, the grant making committee, and fueling our work is absolutely critical. So whether you were able to give $5 and just a tip for coming today, or we have major corporate sponsors or pillar sponsors attending an event, thank you for fueling our mission, because we cannot do it without you. And speaking of investing, not just in your women's fund, but we want to invest in women. We are going to focus this time, this place, in you, in many of you, investing in her financial future. So we're going to have gender-focused tools for wealth building and retirement, because we're doing unpaid work, because we're working 2 or 3 jobs, because we decide that we have to take care of our kids because we can't find high quality, affordable early child learning, etc. It really impacts generational wealth especially for women. So please join us again next time. Panelists, Carrie, amazing. I'm enriched and fired up, ready to go. Thank you all so much. Unmute.
Thank you so much. This was
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you very
thanks to
much.
everybody in the chat. It was great. Great stuff in the chat.
What a group. And thanks, team. Come on in, team. Thank you, Viviana, Kami,
Thank you, everyone.
Tasha, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate you all. The conversation does not end here. The work has just begun, right, Lucia?
Yes. Sorry, it was cute.
All right. Talk to you all soon.
Bye.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.